came to serve, not to be served. In Mark 10, Jesus is talking to his disciples for at least the third time about his impending death. And I know the poor guy's got to be sitting there thinking, guys, don't you get it? I've been telling you over and over again. Tomorrow, we're going to Jerusalem. And the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death, and they will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, they'll spit on him, they will flog him, and they will kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. Now that's the reading from the scripture. But in the real world, Jesus wasn't talking about third person. Jesus was telling his disciples, they will condemn me to death. They will hand me over to the Gentiles, who will mock me, and they're going to spit on me, and they're going to flog me, and they're going to kill me. And 3 days later, I will rise again. But you see, Jesus might just as well have been talking a foreign language to his disciples, because they just didn't get it. They just didn't hear him. And even two of his closest friends, James and John, didn't understand it as much as they'd been around him. Jesus has predicted his death, and he's doing it again, and they don't seem concerned at all about his suffering, what he's going to have to go through. Instead, they're looking out for themselves. They're looking out after their own self-interests. And they approach him privately. They get him off to the side. They don't do it in the crowd in front of the other disciples. They bring Jesus over into the corner. And that kind of tells you something right away. That they have something they don't really want everybody else to know about. They want to talk to Jesus in private. You see, if they'd been talking about something high and noble, they would have done it in front of everybody else, so they would look good. But no, this is a different kind of a request. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever it is we ask. Wow, what a broad question that is. I want you to do whatever I ask. Sometimes people approach me and they'll say, Pastor, I want you to do something for me. And I think about this passage. I think about this idea of whatever it is, do it. And my response usually is, I'll do what I can. You see, if a child came to you and asked, we want you to do whatever it is that we ask, what would be your reaction? You'd brace yourself because you know it's going to be a doozy. You see, that was Jesus' reaction too. What do you want me to do for you? He replied. And they replied, well, let one of us sit on the right and one of us on the left in your glory. And even after seeing Jesus in all of his compassion and hearing all of his teachings, these guys were still only interested in one thing. They were interested in taking care of themselves. They want to be in the highest places of authority next to Jesus, where they're going to be served, and they don't have to worry about this service bit. And they tell him, well, think about our relationship. It certainly seems to entitle us to a special place in the kingdom. Nothing about giving thanks to Jesus for what he has done and what it is that he's about to do. and what he will continue to do throughout their lifetime. No concern about trying to see what they could do to help him through this trauma or what they could do after he was gone. No, they were interested in their own power, their own place in the kingdom. And you know, the mother of James and John actually made this same request of Jesus in their son's behalf. We read that in the book of Matthew. And some scholars believe that she was the aunt of Jesus, and so she was making this request kind of as a family. You know, if the aunt asks it, maybe it'll be okay. You know, if you're family, you really ought to take care of family first, shouldn't you? Look how often it happens in politics. Does the name Kennedy ring a bell? How about Bush? How about Clinton? It's not unusual for somebody to try to use a family name or social ties in order to get ahead, in order to cut in the line, to be bumped up over somebody else, somebody that may even be more qualified than we are. You see, our goal is to get ahead, and sometimes we really don't care whose turn it is. In this world, it's survival of the fittest. After me, you come first. Dog eat dog. And John and James wanted to get ahead. They were not just asking Jesus to be chummy and to be a pal and sit close to them for a relationship. This was not a request for a relationship. It was a request for power. They wanted to be at the top of the pecking order. They wanted to be served. They didn't want to serve. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink from the cup that I drink from? Can you be baptized into whatever it is that I'm baptized to be? You see, Jesus wanted them to understand that in the kingdom there are no positions of power, and it didn't come with family, it didn't come with social ties. You see, it costs a pretty penny to be at the table of Jesus Christ. You don't know what you're asking, he tells them again. Can you drink the cup I drink? Or be baptized as I am baptized? You know, Rhonda and I had a pastor in the Dallas area as a Lutheran pastor, and he used to use an expression, are you willing to look good on wood? When he talked about, are you willing to pay the price to be a Christian? And that meant a lot then, and it even means more to me today than it did that. Because he meant, are you willing to pay the price? There is a price to pay to say, I am a Christian. It is to do those things that we need to do. It is to try our best to be more like Jesus in what we think, what we say, and what we do. You see, when we say, follow me, it means to do as Jesus did, not just simply to say what he said. But the disciples did say, yeah, sure, we can drink from that cup, Jesus. There's a gospel song, are ye able, said the Master, to be crucified with me? That's what we sang this morning. Are ye able to be crucified with me? Yea, the sturdy dreamers answered, to the death we will follow thee. You see, James and John were among those sturdy dreamers the song talks about. And again, Jesus said, you will drink the cup I drink, and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized, but To sit at the right hand or my left hand is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they had been prepared. And Jesus explained that the places of kingdom, in the kingdom of honor, were not his to give. You know, I think about it, maybe in our generation, we would vote for Mother Teresa or Dr. Martin Luther King for those positions. But God probably has other ideas in mind, other servants throughout the ages perhaps, many who are not even known to us. That honor might even be reserved for the janitor of your school or your business. Someone in the community who takes care of the elderly, an unseen person who goes around frequently helping other people. You see, I believe that Christ is talking about heaven when he says there is a place of honor for all who serve him. A place of honor for all who serve him. Never ever think that your service, no matter how menial you think it may be, is in vain. You see, it's really what happens in the next passage that's intriguing to me. It says the other 10 disciples became furious when they learned of Jesus or James and John's private attempt to gain favor with Jesus and get that preferential treatment in the kingdom. We read, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Perhaps they were upset, not because they thought the request was unfair, but because they too harbored those selfish ambitions. Isn't it funny how sometimes we judge others more harshly than we judge ourselves for the same sins? The anger of the 10 other disciples may not have been motivated by the injustice of James and John's request, but motivated by their own jealousy. And at this point, in order to avert chaos and discord among all of the 12, Jesus calls all of them together again. And he begins to re-emphasize what is real greatness. He contrasts greatness in this world, positions of power, elegant houses, expensive cars, fat bank accounts, with the real greatness in the kingdom. Instead, Jesus says, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for the many. I shouldn't have to tell you by now that the service is at the heart of the teaching of Jesus Christ. His incarnation, coming in human flesh, was the most powerful demonstration of that truth. His death, which he had just predicted, was a demonstration of that. As he once put it himself, greater love has no man than this, to lay down his life for his friends. His washing of his disciples' feet at the Last Supper was an indication of that. Think of it. The great, matchless God of all the universe stoops down to become a human being and a washer of feet. This is greatness at its zenith. in a humble, lowly form. He came into the world, and it was not so that he could be elevated to some position of power and made ruler over the Roman world, but he came to suffer and to die for you and for me. He didn't have to do that, but he did it. He demonstrated greatness in immaculate service to his community and to all of humanity. And you see, that's what Christ asks of us to do this morning. He doesn't ask us to die and go through everything that he went through. But he does ask us, he calls us to be of service to one another and to all of humanity. Years ago, there was a provocative story in Discipleship Journal about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and a man who served him. The man's name was Harry Hopkins. Hopkins was Roosevelt's closest advisor during much of his presidency. And I admit to being old enough, and maybe some of the rest of you, listening to some of the newscasts and the criticism of Roosevelt and Harry Hopkins. During World War II, when his influence was at its peak, Hopkins didn't hold any official cabinet position in the Roosevelt administration. And that really disturbed a lot of people because he was so powerful, but he didn't have the position. And he became a major political liability to President Roosevelt. And a political foe of Roosevelt's once asked him, "Why do you keep Hopkins so close to you? You surely realize that people distrust him and resent his influence." And Roosevelt replied, "Someday you may be sitting in this chair where I'm sitting, and you will be president, and you'll be looking at that door, that entrance door, and you'll know that practically everybody that comes through that door will be looking for something from you. You'll learn what a lonely job it is, and you'll discover the need for somebody like Harry Hopkins, who asks nothing but to be able to serve you." It is said that Winston Churchill one time rated Harry Hopkins as one of the half-dozen most powerful men in the world in the early 1940s, and the sole source of Hopkins' power was his desire and willingness to serve. Christ is looking for people like that. Christ is looking for people whose desire is to serve him. Serving Christ is really all about serving those who Christ loves. You may remember the movie Schindler's List that chronicled the efforts of a German industrialist. And through his unselfish activities, over 1,000 Jews on trains to Auschwitz were pulled off the trains and put into work in Schindler's factory. And he tried to save as many Jews as he could. He was a very wealthy man. And so he would buy the workers, the Jews, from the Germans to work into his factory. And as I say, he was a wealthy man. He entered the war as financially wealthy industrialist, but by the end, because of his efforts, he was nearly bankrupt. But the most emotional scene, I think, from that movie comes when Schindler says goodbye to his financial manager of his plant. And this man was a Jew and a trusted friend. And as he embraces his friend, Schindler sobs and says, "I could have done more." He looked at his automobile and he asked, Why did I save this? I could have bought 10 more lives with this. Then he picks up another piece of goods and he said, why did I save this? This could have bought one more life. You see, Oskar Schindler had a heart. He had a heart for serving and for loving and taking care of God's children. At the end of the movie, many of the Jews are seen as they go by Schindler's grave, and they're shown placing stones on the burial marker. And that's a Jewish tradition. It symbolizes that the memory of this man will never be blown away by the wind. It will never be forgotten. Remember, service to God will never be forgotten. Amen.